The sentence I'm about to utter will not come as a shock to anyone this evening. We are exhausted. A little over 8 months ago, our lives turned upside down. It was right as Purim approached, no less. Ironically, a holiday that we literally refer to in Hebrew as v'hanafuch hu, as upside down. And there we were, introduced to a life we didn't ask for, living through, God willing, a pandemic. And 8 months later, we are running out of steam. Depending on where you are viewing from or what your particular life circumstance may be, your exhaustion may result from different things. Perhaps your office is still requiring that employees work remotely and you're exhausted from the extreme isolation, both in your personal and professional lives. Maybe your office is requiring employees to return to the building with restrictions, and you carry concern about how strictly those you work with and encounter every day, how strictly they follow precautions. You're exhausted. Maybe you've never had the option to work from home and have been on the front lines every moment of every day, and have somehow learned to live with a quiet underlying terror of the risk you know you are required to accept in your daily life. Maybe you're not employed at all. Maybe you live alone, and you've had to manage without any in-person contact for the better part of a year. You are exhausted. And maybe none of the scenarios I mentioned apply to you, but either way, whatever the truth is for you, whatever your scenario, you are exhausted. We are exhausted. For months now, we've seen article after article published about pandemic fatigue. Each one reflects on the arc we have seen over the past many months. From the days of phrases like the new normal or we're all in this together, to now when it is no longer the new normal. It's just normal. And it's no longer we're all in this together. It's oh my God, we're on our own. We're exhausted from the constant and very present fear that accompanies our lives. What effect does this persistent and present fear do to us? What choices do we make as a result? This heavy reality served as a backdrop when I was reading this week's Torah portion, Toldot. In it, we are introduced to Jacob and Esau, the twin sons of Isaac and Rebekah. While the Torah does describe a few of their direct interactions with one another, much of what we learn about Jacob and Esau is through the eyes of their parents. We are told that even in utero, the brothers quarreled. It says in Torah, the children pressed against each other inside her. Rebekah thought, if this is so, why do I exist? She was exhausted. While this may be more of a literary foreshadowing tool than actual belief that her children intentionally and maybe even maliciously attacked each other before birth, it is through her experience that we make judgments about their sibling relationship and learn about who they are. This framing shapes our assumptions as we read one of their most famous direct encounters. We read, one day when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the hunting field. He was famished, and he said to Jacob, I'm famished. Let me gulp down some of that red stuff, referring to the stew Jacob had just made. This story, familiar to many of you, leads Esau to sell his birthright. As the firstborn, he was entitled to it. He sells it to Jacob, yes, for a bowl of stew. We scoff and demonize Esau, thinking to ourselves, how is it that he could give up his entire future because he was hungry? Medieval commentator David Kimchi says, rather judgmentally, I might add, which I know is being judgmental myself, but he says that Esau was so impatient that he could not even wait to cook the game he had just killed in the field. He could not wait to cook that game. He was so hungry. He had to gobble up some lentils, Jacob's lentils. Lentils, he says, are the humblest of foods that Jacob had prepared for himself. Ouch. That's a pretty harsh review. Thankfully, as always, we have a tradition rich in various opinions. Rashbam and Ibn Ezra, also from the Middle Ages, have a kinder, more sympathetic view of Esau's choice. Esau, they say, lived a life of terror, day in and day out. As the hunter of the family, he spent nearly every day in the forests, a place filled not only with game to hunt, but with bears, lions, and other dangerous animals, any that could kill him at any time. The livelihood of his family depended on him accepting great risk to his own life. Living with that fear day in and day out, these commentators argue, led Esau to have a mentality where he was not capable of having great concern about his future. He couldn't see it. The thought of inheriting the birthright seemed like an impossibility. His assumption was that the risks he felt like he needed to take in his life would lead inevitably to a premature death. Living with persistent and present fear caused Esau to abandon hope for a different future. Looking back at the text, it tells us Esau hu ayef, often translated in the text as famished. But for any modern Hebrew speakers among us, it's how one says tired or fatigued or exhausted. Hu ayef, he was exhausted. Yes, it could have been the physical exhaustion that I imagine, luckily not firsthand knowledge, the exhaustion that hunting to feed your family could cause. But perhaps it was also the mental and spiritual exhaustion of danger, not only from wild beasts, but of the consequences of not succeeding in the hunt at all, the result of each being the same, death. Esau's cumulative exhaustion for day after day after day after day, living with a present danger, resulted in him giving up something precious to him. He felt as though he had limited options, so he sacrificed his options for the immediacy of now. Hu ayef, he was exhausted. And look at what it led him to do. Anachnu ayafim, we are exhausted. The persistent and present fear that accompanies us daily through these times continues without an end in sight. My plea with you here tonight, though I have a feeling I am preaching to the choir, is do not fall into the trap of Esau. Do not sacrifice the convenience of now for your hope in the different future. According to the Wall Street Journal, among many other publications, pandemic fatigue, or as they write, the general exhaustion surrounding mitigation strategies they continue has led some to engage in more risky behaviors in the search of some semblance of normalcy. And we see the result of those choices as we face quickly rising numbers of COVID cases and COVID-related deaths, and article after article after article begging us to make the difficult choice to only have Thanksgiving with those in our own households and or to have them virtually. Esau let the exhaustion win. And it's tempting, and we understand that urge. But it was that act of giving in to his exhaustion, of giving up his future, of giving up his birthright, that determined Esau would no longer be our spiritual ancestor. Jacob received the birthright. Jacob became Yisrael, and so we became Am Yisrael, the people of Israel. We must, like Jacob, choose hope and a future for generations to come. That is who we are. Yisrael is one who struggles. One who struggles is also one who is exhausted. A struggle is exhausting, but it's focused on the future. We cannot let our exhaustion keep us from also remaining the people of hope. Anachnu ayafim, we are tired, but yesh tikva, there is hope. Hope for the future. We will remain diligent. We will remain distanced and masked. We will find ways to connect to each other. For we are not Esau. We are Jacob. Ken yehi ratzon. May this be God's will.